In every family album, there we were, Alara and Lila. Not just sisters, but reflections. Where my hair was straight, hers had a slight wave. Where my eyes were a calm blue, hers were a stormy gray. But to everyone who knew us, we were two halves of the same soul. We finished each other's sentences. We knew each other's fears without a word being spoken. And we shared a bond that felt ancient and unbreakable. I was the planner, the steady one. She was the dreamer, the whirlwind. I was the anchor, and she was the tide. This was our dynamic, the story we told ourselves and the world, and for 26 years, I had no reason to believe it was anything but the absolute truth. Our sisterhood wasn't just a fact of my life, it was its foundation. My life was a structure built on that foundation. It was carefully planned, meticulously executed. I worked as a graphic designer at a stable firm, a job that was more about security than passion, but it served a greater purpose. Every paycheck, a precise 40%, was siphoned into a high-yield savings account I'd nicknamed the Blue Door Fund. It was for a small cottage by the sea, a place with a blue door and a garden where I could finally open the small pottery studio I dreamed of. I had spreadsheets tracking my progress, charts projecting my 5-year plan. I denied myself frivolous luxuries, packed my own lunch, and found joy in watching that number grow. It was my future, tangible and real, a testament to my discipline and a promise I was making to myself. Lila, on the other hand, lived a life of beautiful, chaotic improvisation. She was an aspiring actress, a poet, a bartender, whatever the week called for. Her stories were always more vivid than mine, filled with chance encounters and dramatic near misses. I admired her courage, her refusal to be tied down by a spreadsheet, but there were whispers of doubt, so quiet I barely acknowledged them myself. A borrowed cashmere sweater returned with a faint smell of smoke and a tiny, unexplained tear. Frequent forgotten wallets when the dinner bill arrived. Vague, frantic calls asking for a small loan to cover rent, always with a convoluted story and a fervent promise to pay it back next week. I dismissed it all. It was just Lila being Lila, a brilliant, messy, creative soul who just needed a little help from her stable older sister. The requests began to escalate, slowly at first, then with a sudden urgency. One night, she called me, her voice tight with panic. It was a once-in-a-lifetime acting intensive with a famous casting director. It cost $2,000, the deposit was due tomorrow, and she was just short. The story was perfect, filled with just enough detail to be believable, and just enough desperation to trigger my protective instincts. I hesitated for only a moment, the image of my Blue Door Fund flashing in my mind. But this was my sister, my other half. Her dream was, in a way, my dream too. I logged into my bank account, my fingers hovering over the transfer button. With a deep breath, I sent the money, silencing the small, cold voice in my gut that was screaming at me to stop. That was 2 months ago. The repayment date came and went, met with a flurry of texts about a delayed paycheck and a broken-down car. I told her not to worry. Tonight, I was making my monthly contribution to the fund, and decided to look at the balance, to feel that familiar sense of accomplishment. I logged in, a small smile on my face, but the smile vanished. The number on the screen wasn't just $2,000 short, it was catastrophically wrong. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scrolled through the transaction history, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Withdrawal after withdrawal, a cascade of small and large sums bleeding my dream dry. And then I saw it, a series of transfers, not to a utility company or a loan payment, but to a name I knew as well as my own. The denial was a physical force. That single notification about a declined payment was just the tip of a terrifying iceberg. Frantically, Alara logged into her banking apps, her hands shaking so badly she kept mistyping passwords. When she finally got in, the reality was worse than any nightmare. Balances drained, credit lines maxed out, savings, painstakingly accumulated over years, were gone. It wasn't a mistake. It was a systematic demolition of her financial life. Every account, every card, every safety net she had ever built had been compromised, leaving a digital crater where her future was supposed to be. This wasn't just theft, it was erasure. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous hell of hold music. For fraud, press 3. Each call was a fresh wave of humiliation, forcing her to recount the violation to a new, dispassionate voice. And with each conversation, the hole grew deeper. It wasn't just her existing accounts. There were new ones. High-interest credit cards opened in cities she'd never visited. Personal loans secured against assets she didn't own. The numbers were astronomical. A debt so crushing it felt unreal. The perpetrator was a ghost, a sophisticated professional who had stolen more than her money. They had stolen her identity, creating a phantom version of her that was reckless and spiraling out of control. Clearing her name became a full-time job she was devastatingly unqualified for. She was buried in an avalanche of affidavits, police reports, and notarized documents, each one a battle to prove she was the real Alara. Her dream of buying a home, once a tangible goal, dissolved into an impossible fantasy. Her credit score, once a source of pride, was now a weapon being used against her. The system designed to protect her had become a labyrinthine prison, and she was lost inside, shouting her own name into an echoing darkness, with no one seeming to listen or believe her. Weeks turned into a month of dead ends. The police offered sympathy, but few resources, classifying it as another case in a sea of digital crime. The theory was a faceless hacking syndicate from overseas, untraceable, untouchable. But then, a crack appeared in that narrative. A fraud analyst mentioned a single, anomalous charge that didn't fit the pattern. It wasn't a large cash withdrawal or an online purchase. It was a small in-person transaction at a tiny, independent coffee shop a few towns over. A place Alara had only visited once, months ago. A place she'd only ever mentioned, in passing, to her sister Lila. That one detail was a splinter in her mind. It was illogical. Why would a master criminal risk an in-person purchase for something so trivial? The thought was a poison she couldn't ignore. Driven by a desperate, sickening curiosity, she started digging deeper, not into bank records, but into public ones. She ran background checks on herself, hoping to find the false addresses used by the thief. Late one night, fueled by caffeine and dread, she typed her own name into the county's public arrest records portal. She expected nothing, but a result appeared. A recent charge for petty shoplifting. The name was hers. The social security number was hers. But the mugshot, stark, grainy, and illuminated by a cold, unforgiving flash, was not of a stranger. It was the face of her sister, Lila. The drive to Lila's apartment was a silent, cold fog of disbelief. Each traffic light, each turn of the wheel, felt unreal, as if Alara was piloting a stranger's body towards an unavoidable impact. She walked up the familiar steps, the printed mugshot feeling like a burning coal in her hand. There was no plan, no rehearsed speech. There was only the gaping wound of the question, why? When Lila opened the door, her smile was bright, a perfect mask of normalcy that shattered the instant she saw Alara's face. The confrontation wasn't a shouting match. It was a terrible, suffocating silence, broken only by the slide of the photograph onto the coffee table. Lila's eyes followed it, and in that moment, the mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated into dust. Lila's confession wasn't an apology. It was a performance. Tears streamed down her face, but they seemed calculated, a tool to garner sympathy where none was deserved. She spoke of jealousy, a quiet, corrosive envy that had festered for years. She painted Alara's life not as the product of hard work, but as a series of lucky breaks and effortless successes she was never afforded. Every one of Alara's achievements was reframed as a personal slight against Lila. "You just don't know what it's like," she'd sob, "to always be the other one, the one in the shadow." She wasn't confessing to a crime. She was presenting a justification, twisting her betrayal into a tragedy where she, the perpetrator, was the central victim. The story then unraveled into something far more sinister than petty theft or desperate measures. This wasn't just about paying off a few bills. Lila admitted she had been living a complete parallel life. Using Alara's pristine credit and untarnished name, she'd rented a luxury car, taken lavish weekend trips, and curated a social media presence of a woman who had it all. Alara's life, but with Lila's face. She had tasted the world through Alara's identity and found it intoxicating. The debt was merely the byproduct of a much deeper theft, the theft of a life she felt she was owed. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you were supposed to trust, let us know by hitting the like button. The truth is, these stories are more common than we think. For Alara, this revelation shifted the ground beneath her feet. The numbers on the credit card statement suddenly became meaningless. The thousands of dollars in fraudulent loans were nothing compared to this violation. This was a betrayal of sisterhood, of shared history, of a bond she thought was unbreakable. Lila hadn't just stolen her money, she had stolen her name, her reputation, her very essence. She had looked at her sister's life, the one Alara had painstakingly built, and decided to wear it like a costume. The person standing in front of her, weeping with self-pity, was a stranger. The sister Alara loved had either never existed or had been slowly erased by this resentful changeling. Armed with a confession and a mountain of evidence, Alara's next step felt clear: justice. She spent hours on the phone with the police, laying out the entire sordid affair. She expected shock, a promise of swift action. Instead, she was met with a chillingly bureaucratic response. Because the perpetrator was her sister, because they shared a last name and a history, the authorities deemed it a civil matter. They wouldn't press charges. The case was closed before it was ever opened. A voice on the other end of the line informed her that if she wanted to proceed, she would have to do it herself. She would have to be the one to formally charge her own sister, to drag their family through the courts, to be the agent of Lila's ruin. The choice was hers, and it was devastating. The decision was a single, quiet word spoken to an indifferent officer, but its echo was a deafening roar. The first call came from her father, his voice not laced with sympathy, but with a cold, sharp disappointment. He spoke of shame, of airing family secrets, of how this could have been handled internally. He didn't ask how she was, he asked how she could do this to them. Then came the aunts, the uncles, a chorus of whispers painting her as the cruel one, the unforgiving one. They saw Lila's crime as a mistake, a misstep. They saw Alara's pursuit of justice as a betrayal. In the space of a day, the very people who were supposed to be her sanctuary became her jury, and they had already delivered a guilty verdict on her character. She was no longer the victim. She was the instigator of a family war. Her world became a labyrinth of automated phone menus and indifferent customer service agents. To reclaim a name, she first had to prove it was stolen, a task that felt like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. Each call was a new circle of hell. She would spend hours on hold, listening to mind-numbing music, only to be transferred to another department that couldn't help. She was forced to recount the intimate details of her sister's betrayal to strangers, who treated it with the emotional weight of a billing error. To them, she was just a case number, a series of digits on a screen. But to her, every form she filled out, every security question she answered, was a fresh wound, a reminder that the person who knew her best had used that knowledge as a weapon. The deepest cut came during a late-night call from her mother. There were no questions about the debt, the legal fees, or the emotional toll. Instead, her mother's voice was thick with tears, but they weren't for Alara, they were for Lila. She pleaded for her to drop the charges, to think of her sister's future, to remember the blood they shared. "She's your sister, Alara. Families forgive," she'd said, the words twisting like a knife. That was the moment Alara understood the true nature of her isolation. It wasn't just that they didn't support her, they were actively protecting the person who had destroyed her life. She hung up the phone not with anger, but with a chilling, profound emptiness. The bonds she had trusted her entire life had evaporated. Something inside Alara shifted then. The grief and shock that had paralyzed her began to cool, hardening into something else entirely. It was resolve. The tears stopped. She pulled out every piece of paper, every fraudulent bill, every collection notice, every letter from the credit agencies, and spread them across her floor. It was a map of her stolen life, but instead of seeing a disaster, she now saw a battlefield. She bought binders and color-coded tabs. She started a log, documenting the date, time, and name of every person she spoke to. She spent her nights not sleeping, but reading, devouring articles on identity theft law and civil litigation. The soft, trusting woman who had been so easily broken was being systematically replaced by a meticulous, relentless fighter who refused to be erased. Weeks turned into a monotonous blur of paperwork and phone calls, a war of attrition against a faceless bureaucracy. The silence from her family was a constant, heavy presence. She was an island, and the tide was rising. Then, one afternoon, amidst a stack of junk mail and final notices, was a single, crisp envelope. It was from the county courthouse, its formal insignia feeling both terrifying and validating. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside, on a single sheet of paper, were the words she had been fighting for, the words that promised an ending, a confirmation. A court date had been set, The private nightmare was about to become a public record. The final confrontation with Lila was no longer a possibility. It was an appointment. The courtroom was nothing like the movies. There was no dramatic music, no gasping gallery, no last-minute confession. It was a sterile, silent room, smelling of old paper and disinfectant, where the truth was just another file in a stack. Lila sat across from me, a stranger wearing my sister's face, her expression a practiced mask of remorse that no longer reached her eyes. The judge, a tired man who had seen 1,000 stories like ours, spoke in a monotone drone, delivering a verdict that felt less like justice and more like a transaction, a restitution order, a payment plan, a legal acknowledgement of a debt that could never truly be repaid. There was no victory, only the cold, quiet finality of a gavel striking wood, a sound that echoed the breaking of a family. In that moment, the weight of it all settled in. I had won a case, but I had lost a sister. The verdict was a piece of paper, not a magic wand. It didn't erase the years of debt, the sleepless nights, the gnawing anxiety. It simply confirmed the betrayal, notarized it, and filed it away. The calls from our parents stopped, not out of anger, but out of an unbearable discomfort, an inability to choose a side in a war where everyone had already lost. Holidays became minefields of unspoken words and empty chairs. The family I knew had been a fragile ecosystem, and Lila's deception was the invasive species that choked the life out of it. I learned the hardest lesson of all. The legal system can address a crime, but it has no power to mend a heart. The restitution payments were sporadic at best, each one a bitter reminder of the cost of trust, a small deposit against an infinite emotional overdraft. Years began to pass, measured not in birthdays or seasons, but in small, hard-won milestones. The first credit card I was approved for after years of rejection. The day I signed a lease for my own apartment, my name, and my name alone, on the dotted line. Rebuilding a life from financial ruin is a slow, brutalist form of architecture. Each brick is laid with suspicion. Each window is barred with caution. I became a forensic accountant of my own life, scrutinizing every statement, questioning every transaction. The easy, open trust I once had in the world, and especially in those I loved, was gone forever. In its place grew something tougher, more resilient. I wasn't the same person I was before. The fire had burned away the softer parts, leaving behind a core of tempered steel. I've thought a lot about forgiveness. People talk about it as if it's a destination, a peaceful shore you arrive at after a long journey. But for me, it's not. It's not about absolving Lila or pretending the wound isn't there. Forgiveness, I've learned, is the quiet, personal decision to stop carrying the weight of someone else's choices. It's acknowledging that the scar will always be a part of my story, but refusing to let it be the entire story. It's the understanding that some bonds, once shattered, can't be glued back together. You can only sweep up the pieces to avoid cutting yourself on them again. I don't know if I will ever speak to my sister again, but I have chosen to stop letting her ghost haunt my future. Alara's story is a chilling reminder that the deepest betrayals often wear the most familiar face, a warning that the greatest dangers can be found inside our own homes. But what happens when the deception isn't about money, but about a hidden identity that shatters a family's entire history? Click here to watch our next investigation into the man who discovered his father was a fugitive on the FBI's most wanted list for 30 years, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss a story that uncovers the unbelievable truths hiding in plain sight.